What's going on, guys? This is Just Crust here, and I'm back with another YouTube video. And today we're doing the first true iteration of Today I Learned. I just got out of my classes for today. I had two, and then there's a third one that is currently asynchronous. There's an in-person version, but I choose not to go. Um, so there's online, and I'll be watching that lecture. That'll probably be included in Wednesday's version, because that class is a Monday-Wednesday class, for me at least. So today, as you can see, we're in our Minecraft world. As you can also see, or assume, we've kind of changed some scenery since the last time I did this. I did a live stream where basically it came off the heels of me failing a math test, which you'll probably hear about tomorrow, hopefully. Um, and so I just did a Minecraft stream to lighten the mood a little because that Friday night I was tired, or after hearing about it on Saturday, I was a little tired. And from the festivities of Friday, the blissful ignorance of me not knowing I failed a math test, made made for a lazy Saturday where I just decided to stay in and play some Minecraft for a couple hours, trying to not think about how I failed that test. But anyway, so today I had two classes. I had my Civil War class and I had American Economic History class. The history, or the, yeah, whatever, that class. So we'll first talk about the Civil War class, because again, that's probably my favorite class. And today we're really starting to get into the meat of things, Civil War wise at least. So last week again we talked a lot about the not log cabin, shoot. Um, that was 20 years ago at that point. We talked a lot about the Dred Scott decision, and we talked a lot about Bleeding Kansas and the Lincoln Douglas debates and stuff like that. So this week we decided to focus, or today specifically, we decided to focus a lot on the election of 1860, and just in general the conventions, the political parties that were, or the different types of parties that were forming, and basically the results. Kind of, we discussed their political strategies per se. So at first, oh, I'm gonna put some stuff down. At first, we kind of just acknowledged the general, which was South. The Southern Democrats and the Northern Democrats were getting increasingly divided, and there wasn't much possibility of reconciliation at this point. And the conventions, I already had lost my wording. So in 1860, they were doing the conventions, and the Southern radicals, the fire eaters at this point, were very much like, we're done with the Democrats at that point. It was, they viewed this election, the election of 1860, as one final chance of fire eaters to get the Democrats to do the bidding of the fire eaters. And if that didn't happen, they were going to secede from the convention. They were going to secede eventually from the Union if the Democrats didn't, or if the party Democrats didn't do the fire eater bidding. And particularly the one main thing that we focused on, or the main code, well, spoiler, that the fire eaters wanted passed was slave codes. They wanted a federal slave law. They basically wanted to re-legalize slavery everywhere in the Union, not just in the territories, which was the debate in Kansas and the Lecompton Constitution, and eventually ending up in the Dred Scott decision. That the goal was the goal was basically they wanted to re-legalize slavery everywhere, and they wanted to, I don't know, because the original debate was legalizing it and legalizing the concept within the territories. Sorry, I wasn't expecting to get fucking swarmed. I'm also getting a phone call I wasn't able to silence because I'm trying not to die to zombies. Basically, let me try to rephrase that in a more succinct way. The fire eaters, for a long time, their goal has always been to push the agenda of slavery forward, whether through any means necessary, basically. Um, and that culminated, obviously, in Bleeding Kansas. And then after the win of popular sovereignty in Kansas, they decided that the Democrats weren't as useful to them anymore. The party Democrats, the mainline Democrats, weren't useful anymore. And that they were getting closer and closer. He just dropped an iron ingot. That's nice. Give me a potato, though. And they decided basically, or they have concluded that secession in general will be the best answer. But it's almost like they don't know when, but they know they have to. And so they decide that the election of 1860 will be their final straw, is that they're going to pitch to the Buchanan administration and the Buchanan Democrats to legalize slave codes, legalize federal slave law so they can bring their slaves anywhere in the Union, and not just. This is one step further than what they were trying to do in the territories, where they just wanted it legalized in the territories so slave owners can travel freely to and from their territories with the slaves, etc., etc. The Democrats or the Northern Democrats specifically, say no. And, well, no shit. They said no. Because the leader of the more moderate Northern Democrats was the champion of popular sovereignty, was Stephen Douglas. And Stephen Douglas and much of the Northern Democrats kind of recognized that if they allowed this, if they federally mandated slave codes, give me 1 second, sorry, I just wanted to up the brightness on my computer. Basically, they recognized at this point that if they legalized the slave code federally, it would be a big political loss amongst completely other ramifications. The political loss of why would their head Democrat, the Democrat who championed popular sovereignty and is a big man of individuals, of the popular rule, why would he, of all people, want the federal regulation of slavery? And so this first convention happened in South Carolina, which was the hotbed of the secession debate. It was the place that almost seceded during the Tariff of Abominations. South Carolina was a very big hotspot of extremists, all going back again to the days of John C. Calhoun. Excuse me. And so after Douglas and the other Democrats basically coming to a standstill and saying, we're not going to push forward this narrative, and we're not going to push forward the slave codes, the Southern fire eaters, the Southern Democrats, they stormed out. And so, you know what, the Democrats, they took the breath, and they said, you know what, we'll try this convention at a more neutral Southern location. So basically, they wanted to relocate to a place where slavery still existed and was still flourishing, but not a hotbed for extremism like South Carolina was. So come June 1860, they go to Maryland and have another Democratic National Convention trying to get this. And the fire eaters again say that the only way you will have our support is if you legalize slavery federally. Stephen Douglas and all of his sect say no, and there it goes. There it goes, is that we have our first split. The Democrats have split now into two parties, which was the Southern Rights Party and the Democratic Party. And then, so that's kind of like where we started. We talked about the Democrats and their problems, and then we discussed the Republicans and their choice. But I guess in the Democrats, they had candidates. The candidates were chosen was that the normal Democrats, I guess at this point just the Northern Democratic Party, chose Stephen Douglas as the runner. Stephen Douglas was highly publicized. Everybody knew who Stephen Douglas was. He was known to he was known for trying to be a moderate and trying to basically maintain just a solid position on popular sovereignty. And then the Southern Democrats chose, I think it's John C. Breckinridge as their candidate. He was James Buchanan's vice president. And this could be seen for a lot of reasons. obviously the vice presidency of the leading candidate of the presidency was always good. And they recognized that the Southern rights would not gain a lot of support in the northern states. However, Buchanan himself was from a northern state. Buchanan was from Pennsylvania. So they decided they wanted to see how many votes they could divert from some of the northern states by riding off the coattails of Buchanan's successes in quotes, looking back on it historically, but whatever. Um, and so that was the Democrats. So now you have the Republicans. The Republicans are much more united as a force. They kind of understand, there's still the spectrum of radicals to nothing, like the radicals of like the John Browns, who like are immediatists in the abolition movement versus the more lax side. And there wasn't too much of a debate with candidates wise within the Republicans. They recognized the Republicans almost universally recognized that William Seward's irreparable conflict speech, the speech where he said that slavery was basically, we've hit a crossroads where nothing will happen, like nothing will be fixed unless it comes to war. That speech kind of alienated a fuck ton of people and left the Republicans kind of looking towards a more to a more neutral candidate, a more moderate candidate. And that candidate, if you know the history of America, is Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was kind of twofold on this importance, is that he was young enough and kind of a hot shot enough to get sorry, there's a bug in my face, garner national support, but he was also still young enough in politics to not have many political enemies. And he's riding off the coattails of the success of of his debate with Stephen Douglas, where even though he lost the seat, the press that he got from that debate, or those debates, was incredible. Like, he was very well received from those debates. Due to the newspaper coverage as well as every other coverage of it. And so that was their candidate. They kind of agreed on that. Almost, they agreed that he was the best candidate moving forward. But then, so you see, we have three parties, which is already kind of a full ticket per se. But there's another party by the Constitutional Unionist Party. Give me a second. I'm looking at the notes because I don't remember. And if you can't tell, they're not going to completely be, they're not going to be much of a contender. It's John Bell, who's I believe from Tennessee, and the Constitutional Unionist, which is basically the dregs of the American Union Party, or not the American Union, just the American Party. It's kind of the dregs, which are like ex-Southern Whigs, kind of, who are disavowed with the radicals and disavowed with this, that, and the other, and they focus a lot on the very Whig principle of compromise. And so John Bell, his demographics, the people that he wanted to go for were upper South, lower North. The people who he thought could reach across the dial, and he was a man of compromise. And so now we have four candidates. Big loaded ticket, first off. This is a lot of candidates. So, how's this going to happen? How's this going to go about, really, was the question. All four parties had their own fears. Douglas was worried that he couldn't win. He couldn't just get enough votes. And so he personally campaigned, which kind of broke the norm at the time. The norm was that, there was a tradition of, like, the office chose you. So, like, you didn't go out and campaign for yourself, but he did, noticing that this is a very important election. Lincoln was afraid of the Constitutional Unionists because he thought that they would take votes away from the North. And the Stephen Douglas Democrats were also afraid because he thought that the Breckinridge Democrats, the Southern Rights Party, would take away votes in the South, and vice versa. It was basically, there were two main parties, and it was Republicans and then Stephen Douglas Democrats. And then there was two parties, the Constitutional Unionists and the Southern Rights Party, that if all else failed, they wanted the election to go to the House because the Democrats as a whole had a majority in the House. So if all else failed and the election gets thrown to the House and one candidate gets eliminated, they can do another corrupt bargain type situation like what happened in 1824, which is also coincidentally the last time that there were four major candidates on a ticket, and I guess four candidates that all won electoral votes. So that's kind of what's at stake, is that two parties are one party is very radical and is looking to get this thrown into the House so that they can hypothetically broker a deal and get the way they want. Excuse me. The other party is a party of compromise, and if they're not going to get what they want, they might as well throw it to the House and see what kind of compromises they can broker. So what really happened? What happened was that, or the strategies that were taken, most of the strategies were normal. Again, Stephen Douglas kind of broke the norms by he was campaigning. But another interesting break of the norm, or just an interesting thing in general, was Breckinridge's campaign, the Southern Rights Democrats. So the fire eater rhetoric for a while had been escalated since Lecompton, since the John Brown's raid. It had been escalated to the point where most of the Southern secessionist rhetoric was having a Republican president itself. The election of a Republican president such as William Seward or Abraham Lincoln would be enough to constitute secession, which is, first off, extreme. But that's also kind of how some people are viewing, or some historians viewed Breckinridge's whole campaign, was that he ran a losing campaign on purpose. And you'd ask, why would they do that? Well, the fire eaters for a while, again, have been threatening disunion, have been threatening secession rhetoric. So, what better way to secede than saying, hey, we will secede if this happens, and then it happens. Whether intentionally or not, it happens. Some historians viewed that the Southern Rights Party knew for a fact that the Republicans would win. Because the free states alone, if Abraham Lincoln won all the free states, it would be more than a plurality. It would be the majority of the electoral votes, at least. And I assume everybody could do the mental math to figure that out. So there are beliefs that Breckinridge ran his platform as a platform of, we have already lost, we need to gear up for secession. And that's kind of where we ended it, was that we ended it on the plane of there was four parties, everybody was running their different strategies, everybody was afraid of different parties taking votes from each other, which was really interesting of a concept. And then we ended it on noting that Breckinridge Southern Democrats were basically at this point already threw in the towel, and we're just looking for that excuse to secede, and that excuse would be the election of Abraham Lincoln. But we didn't actually cover the results, so that'll be for Wednesday. And my other class today was American Economic History. Great class. And today we're still focusing on, every time I stop moving, I want it to be known. I don't have a face cam, obviously, yet, or probably for a while, but like, I'm moving my hands while I'm talking. So like, I have to stop moving in Minecraft every once in a while because I keep moving my hands trying to like gesture and anyway. Today in economic history, we just talked more about postbellum American economics, and specifically how the Civil War impacted Southern economics and that general theme. Last time we kind of focused on, or like over last week, we focused on how slavery may or may not have held back the South in developing in the antebellum period, meaning before the Civil War, and now in the Civil War era, or after the Civil War, we're trying to see how the Civil War affected the Union's development, obviously, or like the development of the North and South, obviously, and how the development in the North differed from the South, and how the war changed the development of our economy. Because people have always argued that war is good for an economy and such and such. However, looking at least the Civil War, because it was a war with ourselves, it's pretty clear that the short-term effects of the Civil War were disastrous production-wise. And there are like specific numbers to look at, basically, um, that say that production as a whole, at least like specifically within the South, went way down during the Civil War. And while they rebounded back to normal, or like on par with the North, because the North was more manufacturing and also were the winners of the war, by 1880, the North and South's numbers and like percentile of growth were pretty similar at that point. Um, but the real area of problem was the 1860 to 70 range, where the Civil War 61 to 65 falls into for the South. And we looked at something called the real wage lag hypothesis, which was basically value added to money, how it affected the wages earned. And it's like the example we used was like in 1860, say we had $100, $50 went to wages, $50 went to profits, half split. Now, say by 65, prices and stuff increased by 2.15 times. That means that basically the money supply now, instead of $100, is $215. But let's just say that the wages themselves went up to $75. We divide that number by 2.15 to see specific, and we get a number specifically that would be like the wages comparative to 1860. And so the number that came out was like 30 something. And it's basically the wages, while technically in money value overall, they went up. Comparatively, if you like convert it back to 1860, wages went down. And they did the same thing with profits to show that profits increased by roughly like 30%. But the actual wages for wage workers didn't. And so we kind of discussed why, and how the real wage lag hypothesis introduces that more capitalists were sitting, like more capital investors specifically. That's not capitalists, even though that's what I wrote in my notes all the time. The capital investors were sitting on their profits more. During the Civil War era, from 1861 to 1865, there was little investment everywhere, and the capital investors that invested in the railroads, in public transport, in this, that, and the other, there was little to no investment due to uncertainty, because risk and uncertainty both facilitate, or both put an end to investments due to just, again, risk. Nobody, like, you don't want to put your money, and you want to sink your money into something that you don't know the outcome of. It's just that simple. So there was less investment, which could have caused that kind of collapse during the war, among other things. But then this also leads into what we're talking about long-term. Long-term growth, while the short-term growth due to the Civil War is pretty obvious, that it was bad, the long-term growth actually says, relatively, that all of this extra money that was obtained and gained through investments boosted the economy after the war. And it was a lot of investment. Basically, the North had a really good campaign for war bonds, and due to the middle class, the middle class being established, they finally, this was like their first time. The middle class, this was the first time investing was in war bonds and stuff like that. And so war bonds really were a hit with the general public. which made them want to invest more. And that's a big thing, is that post-Civil War, while manufacturing and agriculture stayed on the same level that it had pre-Civil War for the most part, excuse me, there's a much bigger capital market. There's a much bigger wave of investing, because after the war ended, middle-class people had enough money to invest, but there was no war, so there was no war bonds to be bought. So instead, they bought, railroads, and like they bought into railroad companies, and they bought into other stock, as well as just spending it. And we talked about how during the actual war there was a shortage of loanable funds because war effort, so interests were high. It's called, it's um, crowding out. And there's direct and indirect versions of crowding out, basically, where the government needs the money more than the people. So, like, they're going to try to get that money more and try to get that money faster. And then crowding in is like indirect ways that the money supply is not reaching the people, such as high interest rates and stuff. And so during the Civil War, crowding out was really big. But after the Civil War, when all of it was over and the uncertainty ended, we had a big wave of crowding in where loanable funds were in excess. There's very low interest rates, which further developed the capital market, which was interesting to see. And we also talked about, just in general, the South and how the South handled. Oh, whoops. Shields. And how the South handled all of this. Now, basically, from 60 to 80, the South had a drop in overall production, in like economic output, and such that and such and the other. Oh, hello. Which is fuck. But we wanted to know why, and so we started looking deeper, and we started looking into the actual. Oh my god, what the fuck? Alright, cool. Anyway, I didn't know he did that much damage with so much armor on too. Um, we looked at the South. I just ripped a piece of my notes. And specifically, we looked at commodity output. Hey, fuck off, fuck off. Commodity output, and how from the 60s to 80s, the South overall fell. And we wanted to zoom in on that specific time period. Where did my axe go? What? Okay. Well, this is really funny, guys. Guys, hold on. Why did my axe go back into my inventory? That's really fucky. Alright, so I'm gonna barricade myself because I want to get this. I want to get through this. Basically, we looked at commodity output, or we looked at income versus population in the South versus the rest of the United States, and we found out that in the 60s, it was it was pretty close. It was at like 71%, and then when we go to the 80s, it dropped all the way to 39% of the income comparative to the rest of the United States. Which is really bad. And by 1900, it hadn't recovered. And we compared it to different regions within the United States and found the same general curve. It was on a downward slope. So then we looked at commodity output. And we saw that in the South, from the 60s to 70s, there is a 25% decrease in commodity output in both agricultural and non-agricultural fields. And that in the 70s to 80s, there's a big boom coinciding with the North's big boom. So we kind of zoomed in on the focus, which was that this is going to be a fucking shocker. The Civil War caused the South to not do good economically, which I don't know who would be shocked by that. Genuinely, I don't know who's shocked, because I'm not. But that's the conclusion, is that we have economic raw data to show that the war was not beneficial economically to the South specifically. Also, I want to be able to kill things, which was cool. That was cool to like have empirical data to see or to prove what that is. This episode ran really long because, man, I love talking about the Civil War, apparently. And that's going to do it for today's episode of Today I Learned. If y'all want to see more, please like, comment, tell me about it. Tell me about what classes you're taking if you're a student. I'd love to have nice civil discussions. I also should probably add a disclaimer in every video, in the intro and in the description, that I'm not qualified to teach. I'm not a professor. I do not have a college degree. I am just simply relaying what I have learned, so all other historical inaccuracies that I may say are my fault and my fault alone, solely due to my miscomprehension of what I had learned in class. Please do not use what I say as fact. Do your own research. I am just trying to relay what I learned in a way that I can understand it. If I understood something wrong, I'm going to relay it wrong. Thank you. Just making sure we have that under control. I am Just Trust, and I will see you all tomorrow, hopefully, for another episode of Today I Learned.